So what should you do with these readiness insights? I mean, it's interesting to track these things, but how can they be valuable to you? Well, the answer lies in staying on the journey. So we know from different sources, like a survey on tens of thousands of athletes, our own training experience, our experiences as coaches, so I've been coaching for about 15 years at this point, that the biggest thing that leads people to succeed or not is whether they actually just stay on the journey and keep training, right? And like athletes are really prone to getting upset about having a bad day of training or even a couple bad days of training. But the truth is, if you're aware of those things early on, you can almost always recover from them. In the end, you'll probably end up in a similar place. It's when you get really thrown off and you just stop training for weeks on end, especially as maybe an adult who doesn't have a sporting event on the horizon, right? There's not like an immediate goal that you have to be training for. It's kind of easy to just get derailed and say, well, I'll pick it up again when things are easier. But why do we need to measure readiness at all, right? So, you write a program, it worked for some other people, you pick that up and you do it yourself. Well, you're not necessarily going to respond the same way as they did or get the same results. And this is almost its own principle of training, which is individual responses. So each person who goes through the same training may respond differently and adapt differently. As a really basic example, we know that athletes have different inflammatory responses to training. So when you go through, a hard strength training session, or even aerobic training induces this, you do get some muscle inflammation, right? And that can cause you to recover on a different timeline. But even if you were talking about you and your twin, said, hey buddy, let's be on this training program together, right? Your responses and your experience of that program might be very different. Just because even though you're genetically identical, right, and you look the same, your histories are very different. So both your physical training, like so you may one endurance athlete versus strength athlete, or couch potato versus triathlete, you might have different histories that inform how you're going to adapt going forward. And then lifestyle factors are also very important. So one of you might have more job stress or family stress, and that also can impact how you deal with training. So one question that comes up, right, is, well, what happens if I'm training really hard, right? So if readiness is sensitive to hard training, but I know I'm going to train hard, won't my readiness go down? And the answer is yeah. At the end of a long, hard block of training, you would expect to be a little more sore and have a little less energy. That's pretty normal. What you're looking for is, number one, that you don't just tank, right? That doesn't go off the rails, especially early on in that kind of program. And then later on, right, in that training program, when those things do start to decay, that you're doing the things you need to do to kind of buffer that, meaning like you are really attentive to things like sleep hygiene. And that answers the question of why we chose these scores in the first place: the sleep, mood, energy, stress, and soreness. The reason is, throughout all the research, that these are factors that have been found to be sensitive to training loads. So when you do increase stress and you're not recovering fully, that they too tend to go down. But why not something like, say, hydration, right? Hydration is an obvious thing, especially if you're training in the heat, that yeah, on a day-to-day basis, I want to drink enough water so that I go and train and I can be safe and healthy. It's because hydration is, while it might be something that's useful to track, it's not something that's directly influenced by your chronic training stress. And so the readiness score as it's set up is both reflective of behaviors, right? And also then when you accrue this stress and you're not recovering fully, it can reflect that back to you too. So it's responsive to both, say, your recent behaviors, and it's responsive to the fact that you are taking on additional stress in training. All in all, readiness is really about self-awareness. So it's giving you the power and the knowledge that something's up, that you might want to look into it, and it trusts that you as an autonomous person, right, that you have the ability to solve those problems.